Thank you. I would like to thank you all for being here, for uncover the inherited biases of AI and how we can fix it. My name is Gabrielle. You may also call me Gabby. And I would like to thank extra much you that came here, because I was told a few months ago at another data conference when I spoke about, oh, I'm talking at Data Innovation Summit about this. A man told me, wow, that's an extremely provocative thing to talk about. I hope you know that no one will show up for it. So I will all thank you for being here and actually listening to this, because I find it very interesting. So let's start with what is bias. According to Merriam-Webster, it's an inclination of temperament or outlook, especially a personal and sometimes unreasonable judgment. It is also another word for prejudice. Now, we all here have biases, and that doesn't make you a bad person. It's just good to be aware of them so that you can look past them. For example, a bias can be pretty harmless. For example, I know that I prefer dark clothing instead of light ones because I'm not afraid to stain them, and I think that they look nice from me. But they can also be pretty harmful. For example, I know that when I go in to interview a candidate, and that candidate is female, I often have a more positive belief in that specific candidate than if it is a male one. Now, as I said, this is maybe not the best, but I am aware of it, and therefore I can look past it and actually look at the evidence to say which one is the best candidate for the job, and inherently, which person is it that I want to work with. But this is very specific to me as a person. So what does it look like with bias in AI? AI isn't evil in itself. It has systematic faults. AI systems contain biases due to several reasons. It could be cognitive biases, and these are unconscious errors in thinking that affect individual judgments and decisions. It could be algorithmic bias. By that I mean that machine learning algorithm can reinforce existing biases present in the training data or through the algorithmic design. Most of the time, bias in AI is because of data-related biases. So it could be historical. Is the data only sampled from a specific time period? It could be the sample size. Is it way too small? Or can it be confirmation bias, i.e., are you using data that only confirms to the beliefs that you have and that you want the result in? But these are all very nice words. How does this actually look like? Let's take an example. So I went to ChatGPT, and I asked it, please make a picture of a clock, analog, that is set to 2:30. This is something that I believe most people in this room is able to do. And ChatGPT cannot. It gave me a clock that is set to 10:10, as you can clearly see. So I told ChatGPT, no, that is set to 10:10. Please set the clock to 4:30. I wanted to give it a new version. And it gave me a clock that's even more wrong. As you can see, the 8 has been switched to a 4, and it's set to 10:22. Now, why does this happen? This is because of data bias. If you Google analog clock, you will get a lot of pictures of clocks set to 10:10. Now, I don't know why exactly. I think it's a beauty standard set by the clock companies. But that's what they believe clocks look nice. So therefore, when training ChatGPT on how an analog clock looks like, it only knows of clocks that show 10:10. So it doesn't inherently understand what it means for a clock to be set otherwise. Everybody with me so far? Make sense? Great. So this is a very good example for a harmless bias. And honestly, why should we care? Because we live in a world where a lot of companies are choosing to shut down their D&I initiatives because of a certain person that has taken residency in the White House. Donald Trump, if you didn't know, I hope you read the news. So obviously, a lot of companies don't see the importance in this. Why is it important that ChatGPT knows how to make an analog clock that is set to anything else than 10:10? Who are truly the victims of bias in AI? And I believe the victim of AI, we are all potential victims to being discriminated against by AI. It's just that some of us are more in risk than others. So let's look at some examples of that. And now I would like to say this gets a little bit sad, but I will come up with examples on how to fix this. So please remember that. But it does get a little bit sad. So let's look at some examples. Historically, facial recognition software is very, very bad at recognizing faces that aren't of white people. Therefore, AI systems that are used by the police, for example, in the USA, facial recognition software doesn't see the difference between two possible people that have committed a crime. So they get a picture of a potential perpetrator, put it in their little algorithm, and it gives them the answer of that is wrong, inherently. And so then they arrest that person and cause them harm, which is not great when that person is innocent. There's the example of Whisper, which is OpenAI's transcription tool that is used by hospitals. And why is this so important? Because when you go to a doctor and they use a technology, then according to several studies, about half the time hallucinates what it has been said during that meeting. It is not great. According to several studies, the hallucinations could range from racial commentary to imagined medical treatments. I think we've all probably have been to a doctor once or twice, and you probably don't want to have faulty information in your medical journals, because then if you go to the next doctor, it will not be right, and you might get a faulty diagnosis, or you don't understand what is wrong with you, which is not great. And then to the last example, Biogen. Biogen is an algorithm that's used by the police in Spain to assess the risk of women getting more hurt in their violent relationship. So according to several studies, Biogen is, sorry, I'm a bit nervous. It undervalues psychological violence and newer forms of non-physical violence. About half of the cases that come into the police, they receive such a low risk level that they don't get any support from the police. Between 2003 and 2021, 71 women died after going to the police and getting such a low score that the police don't believe that they need any support. About 45 of cases, they don't get any support because the algorithm doesn't believe that they have to, which is, of course, not great. And why is this so hurtful? Part of why this is bad is because we as people tend to believe machines and AIs too much. There's an over-reliance. And it's kind of like driving a car with only looking at the GPS and never looking at the road. For the case of Biogen, for example, in 95% of cases, police don't go and manually change the risk assessment level that they get. They're fully capable of doing this. So if you get a risk score that the police says, I don't really believe this, 95% of cases, they don't change it. And that is a great example of over-reliance. I said this was going to get a little bit sad, but now we can move forward and talk about how can we actually fix this? And we are the right persons to actually be here and to talk about this. And the first step in knowing that there is a problem. I believe that some of us might be engineers in this room, and engineers want to fix problems. But then they need to know that there is a problem to fix. So yay, you're all here, you're all doing the first step. Great job. But what more can we do? We can ask questions. And I think that the best question to ask first is, can the data be unbiased? Just because an AI can do it, maybe doesn't mean that it should. For example, there are some AI companies in the US working on an algorithm that is going to help judges with actually incriminate people and give them I'm sorry, I lost my words, delivering sentences based on historical rulings, which inherently can't be unbiased because old rulings, the data is heavily influenced by biases and prejudice because of ethnicity, gender, and social standing. So that is something that never could be unbiased. So therefore, maybe it's not the greatest fit for AI because it doesn't know how to not be biased on working on such data. Now, if you do find that your case is something different and you realize, okay, this can actually be solved with AI, then maybe the questions that you should ask yourself, do we have sufficient data sets? Is it large enough? Is it cleaned properly, et cetera, et cetera? Of course, it should fit, but keep on asking questions all the time. Now, and also with this, testing, testing, and more testing. The most exciting things that engineers know, am I right? I see some nodding faces. Yeah, testing, super exciting, super fun. Of course, the test should be relevant to the AI application, but just like any other code, AI needs to be tested and iterated on before being launched. And also to remember to keep on testing it even after it has been launched, because maybe you add more data, or maybe the algorithm has a bias in itself, so it starts to develop biases. So it's important to start testing and to never stop testing. So for example, if you build an AI that's going to detect precancerous moles, it's important that you also look at subgroups. So make sure that you have tested on different colored skin tones. Historically, people of color have always been forgotten in the medical field, and therefore a lot of pictures out there of examples are only of light-colored skin, and cancer affects everyone. Unfortunately, it isn't biased. So it's very important to remember this and to make sure to test and keep on testing. And then establishing strategies. Oh, super exciting. So strategies can be technical. So look at tools that can help you with finding biases and identify potential sources. It can be operational strategies, which include improving data collection processes using internal red teams and third-party auditors. Actually, there are some great examples of this at Google AI's Research of Fairness that I can definitely recommend a read. I do have at the end of my presentation a reading list that I do suggest you to read. I can add it to the notes as well in Agorify so that you can find it more easily after. And then there's organizational strategy, which includes establishing a workplace where metrics and processes are transparently presented. Because often, what makes an AI evil is the fact that you don't know how it has reached the conclusion that it has. You don't know why it gives you the picture of a clock that's not correct. Or, for example, a few years ago, I saw this article about an AI for precancerous moles that it said that if you give it a picture of a mole with a ruler next to it, it would always say it was precancerous, which is really interesting. And they realized that this was because of the pictures it was being fed. The moles that were labeled as precancerous always had a ruler next to it, but the pictures that didn't have a ruler were not precancerous. And we as people can see that and realize it's not the ruler that makes the mole cancerous. It's the shape of the mole and the color and other things that I'm not fully aware of. But we can see that, and that was transparent, so they actually retracted their AI and made testing that actually created a better product. And then the last thing I want you to take home with you is diversify. Studies show that teams and companies with high levels of diversity are more successful in so many different ways. And diversity eases the identification of biases, because people that are affected of these biases will actually speak up and have it in their mind and say, hey, maybe we should include pictures of not just white people, or clocks that show any other time than 10:10. And also, it would be nice to live in a future where when I ask ChatGPT to create me a realistic picture of how an AI team looks in Europe, it doesn't look like this. Right? I feel like everyone has met a team that looks like this, including myself. I've worked in a team that looks like this. I'm usually the odd one out. And with that one, oh, I spoke very fast. I'm terribly sorry, but we are at the end. Here is the reading list that I do suggest you. And I actually had a great conversation with the lady that works at RISE, which is an institution for research here in Sweden. And she works a lot with EU currently about testing with AI. So I definitely can recommend you talking to them as well, because there's so much help that you can get with making sure to not have bias in your AI products. Does anybody have any questions?